I'm the coordinator of the Rancho Bernardo Historical Society Speaker Series, and I'd like to welcome you to today's talk. Very happy to see everyone here. And let me just preface with a suggestion to please turn off or mute your cell phone if you haven't already done so. And I would also mention our next program, just for your information. Next program in our series will be April the 13th. Historian Max Carrillo will be speaking on the King's Road Then and Now. He has done much research on the history of El Camino Real as well as on the Spanish missions. So please mark that on your calendars. Our talk today is about the Rancho Bernardo Study of Healthy Aging. And this has been obviously a very significant study and an ongoing study. And we're happy to see so many people who have been part of this study here today. And this is really a very unique event for our community. And I'm very happy to host, to have Gail Laughlin and Linda McEvoy here to talk about the study. They have been principal investigators in the study. Dr. Laughlin is an associate professor of epidemiology at UCSD's Department of Family Medicine and Public Health. Dr. McEvoy is a professor of cognitive neurosciences and epidemiology in that department. And we are very happy. Oh, and I should also point out, if you'd like any information about our speaker series and about the society, we have brochures in the back that you can look at. Please take, if you're not already a member of our society, please consider joining. We also have cookies, complimentary cookies, and water for people at the end of the show. So thank you very much for your attention. And without further ado, I'm happy to introduce McEvoy.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for coming out. We're so happy to be here. So grateful for the opportunity to come back and tell you a little bit about the Rancho Bernardo Study and its historic contributions to our knowledge of healthy aging. I don't know if you know it, but Rancho Bernardo is famous around the world amongst at least epidemiologists and public health scientists. It's one of the longest running cohort studies in existence, and it was founded by Dr. Elizabeth Barrett Connor in 1972. And unfortunately, Dr. Barrett Connor couldn't be with us today. She would have loved to have been here, and you would have loved to have had her because she's an amazing speaker. But unfortunately, she couldn't make it today. But other members of our team are here. Dr. Gail Laughlin, Dr. Donna Kritz Silverstein back there, snuck in, and members of Dr. Barrett Connor's family, Jim Connor there, Caroline, daughter Caroline, so her husband Jim, and son Dave. Yes, I remembered, you were testing.
And one of the long-term research nurses.
And one of our long-term research nurses, Nancy. So it's really wonderful to be here. So most of the people, including Nancy, have been involved with the study longer than I have. I've only been involved with it for 10 years. Other people here have been involved 20 or 30 years. But you know how people like to delegate, so as the more junior person, I'm the one that's up here. So what is the Rancho Bernardo Study of Healthy Aging? Can I have a show of hands of people, how many people here have heard of it before? Wow. Oh, somebody can't hear me? Is that, can you all hear me? Okay. Just let me wave at me if you can, and I'll try to speak louder. So a lot of you here do know about it, and for those of you who don't, the Rancho Bernardo Study of Healthy Aging is a unique longitudinal cohort study, by which epidemiologists mean it's a study of the same people that we've followed over time, that was initiated in 1972. It was originally part of the Lipid Research Clinic's prevalence study. And at the time, there were 6,300 residents of the community volunteered for the study. And that included 82% of adults that were in the targeted age range of 30 to 79, which is a remarkable turnout. Community-based studies hardly ever get that amount of participation from the community. So it was pretty amazing. And Rancho Bernardo, as I said before, has made fundamental contributions to our understanding of many diseases of aging and of factors that contribute to healthy longevity. It was the result of some good luck, Dr. Barrett Connor's foresight and determination, I'll be talking more about that, hard work by many scientists, and most importantly, by the dedication of the community. So we're very grateful to be here to talk about it today. So how it all began. back in the 1970s, high cholesterol was known as a risk factor for heart disease, and when it was measured in the clinic, they only measured total cholesterol. But there was some research showing that some cholesterol might be good, like the high-density lipoproteins that we know today is a good cholesterol, and they weren't quite sure of the role of triglycerides in heart disease. So we also didn't know how many people across the countries had high cholesterol. So the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, which is one of the institutes of the National Institutes of Health, initiated a nationwide study called the Lipid Research Clinic's Prevalence Study to learn more about the prevalence, causes, and consequences of hyperlipoproteinemia. I just like saying that word because it sounds like supercalifragilistic. It just means a fancy way of saying high cholesterol or high fats in the blood. So they wanted the study to be done at different sites across the country so they could get a very diverse sample from different geological regions, different races and ethnicity, and different ages. And UC San Diego was chosen to lead data collection at one of those sites. And just so you know, the other sites that were involved were in Iowa, Baltimore, Minnesota, Oklahoma, Houston, Texas, Cincinnati, Ohio, Washington, and Seattle. University of Washington in Seattle. In Northern California, Stanford University was involved, and 2 sites in Canada, Toronto and McMaster University. And of all of these studies, Rancho Bernardo, I think, was the only one that turned into a longitudinal study.
One of two.
One of two. One of these
Iowa
other
did
ones
as well.
And how long has that lasted?
It's still going on as far as I know.
Oh dear, we're in a competition? No. Rancho Bernardo was far the more famous study. So in Southern California, Dr. Elizabeth Barrett Connor was a newly arrived epidemiologist, or fairly recently arrived at the University of San Diego, and she was tapped to lead the local study. And she chose the community of Rancho Bernardo because it was the right size. The census said there was about 10,000 people at the time. It was the right distance from UCSD, and what that meant, it was like she didn't mind traveling all the way to Rancho Bernardo to do her studies, but she thought other investigators at the university wouldn't want to do that, so that she would have you guys all to herself for her study. And she said residents were of the right age. She laughs when she talks about this because she actually wrote in her justification that few other studies had old people age 50 and older. And of course we know now that 50 is just the beginning of middle age.
Of course she was saying that as a 35-year-old woman.
Yeah. And the population was fairly homogeneous with regard to education and socioeconomic status, and that's important because of all the things that impact our health, sadly socioeconomic status is one of the most important ones at any age. So she wanted to ensure that the population, there wouldn't be differences in health because of those factors. And it also meant that people here would have access to health care and could provide a reliable health history. And that would allow her to be able to really ascertain the factors that are affecting health without the other confounders. And as I said before, there were other sites around the country that could contribute to people who are of different socioeconomic backgrounds and different educational backgrounds so that we could get a representative sample across the country. And the community, this is very important, the community developers were very, very supportive of this study. They also included free space for her to set up the first study trailer. And that was this trailer here. It was a mobile home that was located on a dirt parking lot. I think it was across the street from the Safeway, so it was a nice central place for people to come. And it was in a trailer, didn't have plumbing or electricity or something, yeah, because it was on the dirt lot. But the community provided that space. And here you have the sign here, it was the Rancho Bernardo Heart Disease Survey. That's also important because this was part of the Lipid Clinic's prevalence study, but Dr. Barrett Connor knew that heart disease involved more than cholesterol, so she wanted it to be a broader study than just the focus on the lipids. And here's another picture from the Bernardo News in 1972. You can see that it was a pretty busy day at the Rancho Bernardo trailer. We even had children that were coming into the study. So at the time, the lipid prevalence clinics took people from age 12 and up, but they were willing to also take people younger than that. So if the family brought in their 5-year-old and wanted their 5-year-old's cholesterol tested, she said, yeah, happy to have you all. So in that first visit, the age range was from 5 to 99. So it's pretty remarkable. Yes, and I will also point out she has these other coronary prevention programs, stop heart attacks. So she really was emphasizing this as a study of heart health right from the beginning. the Rancho Bernardo Study participants, obviously, as I'm going to emphasize throughout, the community involvement was one of the outstanding characteristics. This was actually a quote from one of the scientific papers that was published in the early 90s or 1970s about the study. And in that same paper, a little farther down, I found this quote. Because of repeated phone calls by one of us, EBC, only 3 non-residents contacted completely refused interviews. So that says something else about what was going on. She was very, very persistent. She really wanted to get full participation, and if people didn't want to participate, she wanted to know why. And that's really important scientifically, because if you only get the really healthy, motivated people in your study, and you get the people who are perhaps more sick, they're more likely to smoke or have behaviors that they know might be risky, they don't want to be in your study and talk about it, then that really impacts the scientific value of what we find. It's not really valid. So she was dedicated to getting the most information to make the best science she possibly could. And she likes to tell a story that when she was hired at UC San Diego as an epidemiologist, some of her colleagues, her medical doctor colleagues, looked down on that and said that you'll never amount to anything, epidemiologists just count people. But then she replied, but I intend to count them very well. And she did. She counted them extremely well. I think there was another point you wanted to make, but I forget what it was. I think I wanted to also talk about the extent they went to track people down to find out on follow-up. So if you're wanting to look at whether somebody's cholesterol levels have an impact on their future health, you have to be able to find them in the future to know what's happened to them. So Dr. Barrett Connor and her study team put in a lot of effort and energy to hunt people down. If they moved away from the community, she talked to their neighbors, she talked to their doctor, she talked to the church that they went to try to find where they moved to. When she found where they moved to, she'd contact the telephone operator there to try to find them, or go to the local churches to see if they joined that congregation. And so with that kind of effort, they could really get great follow-up and find what happened to people. And in this paper, they pointed out if they wouldn't have put that massive effort into it, they would have missed 24% of the deaths and the people in the follow-up. And that would have really altered what we understood about the risk factors. So it was a very important for science that she had that kind of determination. So why did the Rancho Bernardo Study continue when the others didn't, except for Iowa? You don't know about Iowa. But the reason why is because Dr. Barrett Connor didn't stick to the script. She did what she was required to do for the lipid research clinic study. It was very important that the same thing was done at all the sites, so you could compare the results across sites. So she did that, but that didn't mean she couldn't do more. So she started out by doing more right away. She added a couple of extra pages of questions on other heart disease risk factors, and she obtained separate funding to analyze the fasting blood glucose levels so that she could look at diabetes as a risk factor for heart disease, because at the time that was one of the very understudied risk factors for heart disease. So the lipid research clinic study was funded by the National Institute of Heart, Lung, and Blood, and they were not interested in diabetes because diabetes was covered by a different institute at NIH, and they like to keep their boundaries there. So they said she couldn't do it. But she went to the local diabetes association in San Diego, and they gave her the funds to be able to do that. And because she had this extra data from the beginning, she was able to then propose future studies to go forward to really, this was the beginning of this remarkable study. And she was the only one of those who did that, and she had to fight to be able to do that. But she's a fighter. So I want to let you listen to her describe a little bit of the study in her own, I think this might work, let's see, in her own words. I'll just get around. So we'll see if this works.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Rancho Bernardo Study and what impact that's had on the community?
Yeah, I think that's been just such a piece of good luck and wonderfulness. So I had this chance to start a study in a defined population, and I decided I wanted to know the response rate. So we went door to door and asked people if they were old enough to be in our study, which is age 30. So we had a census, so we knew at the end of the day that 82% of the age eligible people did come into the first visit. That's pretty amazing. I wanted to study diabetes. The people who funded the study wanted to study lipids, and I was told I couldn't study diabetes because it was funded by a heart institute. And I said, wait a minute, people are going to come in fasting. All I want is a blood glucose, and so the local diabetes association paid for that. And that's the reason that the study survived. That's the reason Rancho Bernardo is still here, and none of the other 12 lipid research clinics survived because they didn't have anything but cholesterol and triglycerides. And it's been fabulous. I mean, the study has expanded now beyond heart disease and diabetes, its original focus, to be healthy aging, and the participants are aging healthy. We have a lot of participants who still come into the clinic in their 80s and some in their 90s, and they are very good about answering a lot of questions and let us measure a lot of things, and they've just been wonderful. So it's been absolutely fabulous, and I think we have learned and contributed a lot to understanding of how people age and how they do it well or not so well. And
Do you have any healthy aging advice for current leadership here at the School of Medicine?
oh, I think healthy aging, you know, I mean, this sounds like something you've known forever, but it wasn't known when we started. But I think it's clear that maintaining a healthy weight and keeping physically active and keeping mentally active are just essential. And our population has the advantage of living in a climate where they can exercise outdoors every day if they choose to do. It's almost every day of the year that you can do that. They're big walkers. Walking in our cohort is associated with much less heart disease and diabetes risk in old age. It's associated with better cognitive function. We've now started studying a whole lot of other aspects of just lifestyle, diet, for example. We've done some interesting things with diet. We were I think the first paper to show that potassium, which dietary potassium is from fruits and vegetables, was associated with a reduced risk of stroke. That was based on my reading a paper about rats, where they showed that if you gave rats potassium before you tied off their carotid artery and caused a small stroke, that they would get much less of a stroke or maybe none at all. And that's fruits and vegetables. Now, fruits and vegetables is now, everybody knows that, but I mean, it wasn't everyday language. So I think we were on the forefront of a lot of observations which now everyone would say everyone knows.
That's just a little bit from this. So, and another one of her many talents was to surround herself by really capable scientists, because nobody can do 47 years worth of science by themselves. So this was the early leadership of the team. Dr. Mike Crickey just recently retired. Dr. Elizabeth Barrett-Connor just retired in November, so not that long ago. Dr. Debbie Wingard retired like a couple years back, I think. And then Katie Kaw is still working in London, right?
Just retired, actually.
Oh, she just retired?
Just retired.
Wow. And it was a big family, as Nancy was saying. So this is the staff and investigators back in 1995. Let's point out Dr. Crick Silverstein here, who's great. She's there holding her little baby who now has graduated college. Yeah, 25. Yeah. See that we've all been aging along with the studies. And more recently, this is in 2010, these were the staff members of the Rancho Bernardo Clinic here. Mary Lou, who was in charge of everything, kept everything going very well. The study coordinator, Patty, was the radiologist. Nori was the nurse. Mark, who did a lot of help in the lab and also helped drive people around to our appointments, was very helpful. And Gabriella, who did some of the cognitive testing and other testing, and of course, Dr. Barrett Connor. So you see that the staff kind of shrank over the years. So this is what a diagram of what the Rancho Bernardo study looked like. So it started in 1972 with the research lipid clinic visits, and then it expanded on over time, and it incorporated 12 visits that we invited people to. Not everybody was invited to every visit, not everybody came to every visit, but we started out with over 6,300 people at the very beginning. And we're still, when we mail surveys to people every year, every couple of years, to find out what's been going on with them and ask them different questions. And in our last survey we had, that was about 2016, we had over 1,000 people still responding to the survey. And I think we have about 1,900 people left from the original cohort who are still alive. This is just to show we've measured all sorts of things over the years, cardiovascular disease risk factors, diabetes, looked at health status and health behaviors, physical characteristics, so everybody was weighed and measured in all sorts of ways, psychosocial measures, like we asked questionnaires about how happy you were or unhappy, other things like that, personality traits. We also got biomarkers, like obviously the cholesterol levels, but also hormones and inflammatory measures from blood measures. We always, when people came to the clinic, they were asked to bring their medications and vitamins and supplements along so we could see what everybody was taking, so that we could look at that, what the effects of those were on the measures we were looking at. In 88, we started measuring cognitive function and physical function tests, bone scans to study osteoporosis and body composition, so lean tissue and fatty tissue we could measure. And then the very last visit, which we only invited, we didn't invite very many people to, although it was more than the people who came. We got brain scans. Brain scans are very important, very expensive, so we didn't have a lot of funding to do that on a lot more people. But we have, now we're looking at some brain measures and participants and looking at their prior history and how that might relate to their brain health later in life. So as I was mentioning, across visit, we've measured almost everything you could imagine. And people were really good at putting up with all this and coming back, so it's pretty impressive. So who are the Rancho Bernardo Study participants, the people in the cohort? So over time, because we got almost everybody from that first visit to 1972 to 74, but then we also opened it up to enrollment later on when we needed a few more people. So we got a total of 6,726 participants, 6,726, which is just really impressive, so impressive. And almost all were at the first visit. And as I said, we were also, even though this was a study of cardiovascular risk factors, we let younger people come in the study. So about 11% were aged less than 20 in 1972, which is really important because now we can really look at things across the life course. We have people that we can study things that are happening in younger age and what effect that has at older age. And life course research is really something that's that scientists are really interested in these days, because we know that aging doesn't start at a certain point in time. It's accumulation of what happens across your life. And so 65% were age 50 or older. Rancho Bernardo was marketed as a retirement community at the time. And people came from all over the U.S., well, actually from 38 states, because we asked about that. And most were married in Northern European ancestry and middle to upper middle class. And as I was mentioning before, most had health insurance, and they were highly educated cohorts. So in a lot of ways, what we find here doesn't really represent what you would find across the country, but we can look at factors without these confounding variables. And this is the age at entry. You can see that over half of people were older ages there. The most important participant characteristic, as I keep talking about, is dedication. Most participants came to at least 4 research visits. Some came to all of them. 25% replied to at least half of the 32 mailed surveys that we sent out. The average length of follow-up was 28 years. And a participant once called Dr. Barrett Connor after receiving the latest mailer and said, "When I joined the study, I didn't know it was for life." To which she replied, "Neither did I." Because it wasn't initially planned to be this longitudinal cohort study. She just kept having research questions and kept coming back until she realized it was a cohort study, and then things became a little more standardized. So the longevity, we were studying healthy aging, and this cohort does have pretty high longevity. So since it started in 1972, we've had a lot of mortality over time. We had a lot of older people coming in at study entry. So the mortality for people who are 50 or older is at 96%. The average age of death is 86.4 years for women and 83.5 for men. So that's about 3 years longer than the U.S. averages. So that's statistically a big difference. And to date, we've had 31% have lived to age 90 or older. So that is also pretty impressive. When we talked to our program officer at NIH, when we were little secret, we spend almost as much time trying to get funding to do research as we do to actually doing the research. So we spent a lot of time trying to convince people that this is really important to study. And they were really excited when they learned we had so many people who were over the age of 90, because that's hard to find those kinds of people in studies, and that's what is in our cohort here. So after those 47 years of the Rancho Bernardo study, what have we learned? First of all, we've learned women and men are not the same. You think it would be 47 years of a study to find that out, right? Pretty obvious. You can start asking why would they find that. But you laugh. But actually, at the time the study started, almost all medical research was done on men. So either that means they assumed men and women were the same, or they didn't care about women. And I'm not sure which is the more generous interpretation to them. But, Dr. Barrett Connor was writing about this at the time in one of the papers. She pointed out that in a 1985 review of the literature on glycemia and coronary heart disease, Only 4 of the 29 studies included women. And more recently, in the 1999 review, only 2 of 20 studies included women. And that's terrible because women's risk factors might be different, the consequences of the disease are different, the way they appear is different. So it's really important to study both sexes. And Dr. Barrett-Connor was always really interested in trying to figure out why do women have less risk of cardiovascular disease. They have, why do men die sooner from cardiovascular disease than women?
So men have twofold higher death from cardiovascular disease than women do, and that's in every country in the world, every country that's been looked at. So it's an intrinsic factor that's not understood.
Say that again, please.
Men are twice as likely to die from cardiovascular disease as women, and that's true throughout the world. We have a plot that shows 52 different studies, and the line, the difference between the men and women is at 2 all the way across.
So yeah, it seems something intrinsic
The
about our
large
biology.
focus of Dr. Barrett-Connor's research was trying to understand that. And the answer is still not there, but she certainly added a lot of information to explaining part of it, like the role of diabetes, for instance.
So now I'm just going to go over some vignettes of the different kinds of things that we found over the years. So one of them is that obviously women have a lower risk of heart disease than men, but that cardioprotective benefit is lost in women with diabetes. So if a woman has diabetes, she's at the same risk of heart attack as men. So that was a very important discovery. And diabetes is a stronger risk factor for fatal ischemic heart disease in women than in men. The relationship between testosterone and diabetes is different between women and men. So older men with low testosterone are more likely to develop diabetes and have a shorter lifespan, but the opposite is true of women. So women with high testosterone are more likely to develop diabetes and have a shorter lifespan. So that's an interesting difference that we don't fully understand. And Dr. Laughlin here did those studies.
Dr. Barrett-Connor used to say that just means that boys should be boys and girls should be girls.
And some of the early reports, mind if I smoke, care if I die. So the risk of heart attack is 2 times higher in non-smoking women married to smoking men, reported that in 1984. And this is what she was mentioning in the clip, a high potassium diet, so 4 to 5 servings of fruit and vegetables, reduces stroke risk. And a high sodium, low potassium diet increases blood pressure, and the really important part of that was the low potassium. And these studies were 1987 and 88, so that's quite a long time ago. So lipid levels, this started out as a lipid study, and what we found from back then is that the lipid levels in Rancho Bernardo were similar to those nationally, except the Rancho Bernardo participants had a higher level of HDL cholesterol, so the good cholesterol. And that might reflect their healthy lifestyle. So what we found was that drinking in moderation, exercise, not smoking, and losing weight were all associated with higher HDL cholesterol, so the good cholesterol. And of these factors, the drinking in moderation is the one that really drives up the HDL. Also found that people who eat 3 to 4 meals per day have better the good cholesterol.
Oh, okay.
So people who drink moderately, who have like a glass of wine with dinner, will have more of the good cholesterol than people who don't. So drinking in moderation.
Is that only red wine or?
No.
It can be white wine too?
It can be white wine, it can be other kinds of alcohol as well. And moderation is, as I would say, like about 1, maybe 2 glasses of wine or drinks a day. The guidelines, pardon me?
Any kind of wine?
Any kind. Maybe not the fortified, really strong kind there. You want smaller glasses. So the guidelines do recommend for women of any age only 1 glass or 1 drink a day, and for men under the age of 65, the guidelines are up to 2 drinks per day, and then for older men it's only 1. Just so no after dinner drinks, basically. Also, people who eat 3 to 4 meals per day have better lipid levels than the same who have the same number of calories in 1 or 2 meals. So spreading it out across the day is better. And And we also found that women have more social connections than men, and larger social networks predict greater longevity. So men should get out there and make more friends, hang out with them more. And women and men who are more optimistic have lower risk of death from coronary heart disease than those who are less optimistic. And men in Rancho Bernardo are about the same weight as men in other parts of the country, but the Rancho Bernardo women were significantly leaner. So a lot of skinny women in the cohort. So what we found was that overweight in adulthood increases the risk of heart disease and diabetes, especially if the woman was thin as a child. And in 1996, Dr. Garrett Connor reported that weight loss begins to occur about 20 years prior to a diagnosis of dementia. So this is interesting because we know that being overweight in middle age is a risk factor for dementia and cognitive decline in later years. But being overweight when you're older isn't a risk factor. In fact, it seems to be the opposite, that people who are at lower weight when they're older are at higher risk. But we don't know if that's because being lower weight increases your risk, or if Alzheimer's disease, which has a period, a long latent period when people don't know it's there but the pathology is built up, that might actually be contributing to the weight loss might be from the disease itself. So as a consequence rather than a risk factor for the disease. And other studies have now shown this as well in people who are at genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease, that the weight loss starts early. And then weight tends to decrease after age 60, but central obesity tends to increase. And the Rancho Bernardo women with lower body fat tend to have a shorter lifespan, which wasn't true for Rancho Bernardo men. So I wanted to just mention that the association with weight and mortality is, as I was mentioning, different in older ages. And we find the lowest risk for mortality in people who are actually in the overweight range. So this overweight range between about 25 and 29.9 is not so bad, which I think suggests to me that these BMI guidelines maybe should have been more age specific. Maybe these, which are standard for both sexes and across the lifetime categories, is not necessarily optimal for older people.
So are you talking about after age 60 specifically?
Specifically where the cutoff is, I'm not really sure, but
About
about
60, 65,
yeah, the studies have shown.
It's actually a big movement to come up with new guidelines for BMI categories in older adults.
Yeah, so when I go to the Y and I see the women in the changing room, tiny little women weighing themselves, I want to say, stop that. Go have something to eat. So I like this cartoon. What fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? So we didn't have to say this to our participants because actually almost all of our participants engaged in regular exercise. So it makes it a little bit more challenging for us to track the effects of exercise because everybody's out there being healthy outside and getting exercise. But we have found that physically active older adults do better on cognitive tasks than those who are not physically active. And this is especially true of people who are also active earlier in life. So being active throughout your life, even into the later ages, so we find that the curves really come apart more the older you get, the more benefit we see from being physically active. And I told you that we measured all kinds of things. We have all fancy equipment to measure everything. We get a lot of our information from simple things like, do you exercise 3 times a week? That simple question is really predictive of mortality, heart disease, and cognitive function. So sometimes it's just the simple questions that are really important to know. And I also wanted to point out that we're still actively publishing on this data set, and we're still getting a lot of attention for it. So these are a couple of things from the Rancho Bernardo study that's been in the news recently. This one just came out last month, and this was led by a medical student who came to us with an idea of wanting to look at the association between hearing loss and cognitive decline. So we helped him, we gave him the data set, we helped him analyze that, and we did find that hearing loss, even mild hearing loss, is associated with greater cognitive decline, and moderate to severe is even more steep cognitive decline. So protecting your hearing is important. These studies that we're doing are observational studies, so we can see a relation between 2 variables, but it doesn't mean that one causes the other, so we can't really say that maybe if you had hearing aids, this wouldn't help, but there is a study going on looking at that. Another thing that was in the news, I just wanted to mention, this one was in the news a couple of years ago. This was also led by a graduate student. And what we found here, talking again about moderate drinkers, we found that people who were drinking moderately and regularly, like almost every day, were more likely to live to age 85 than people who weren't drinking, and also more likely to live to age 85 without developing cognitive impairment. So unfortunately, when we wrote the paper, we used some words we really regret, like we said, heavy drinkers. And by heavy drinkers, we're talking 2 drinks a day, you know, so that's, no, we're not talking 10 drinks a day or going out and binge drinking, so we really wish we could go back and change those categories. But because they have those guidelines saying that, you know, more than 1 drink a day in older people would be considered, we couldn't say that was moderate because according to the guidelines, that's drinking above recommendations, so we call that heavy. Going back in time, I would now just call that drinking above guidelines and leave it. In our cohort, we don't have very many people at all who are drinking heavily, so we can't really look at, you can't use this data set to look at the effects of heavy drinking on health because we just don't have data there.
Excuse me, 8 glasses of water, is that heavy drinking?
That's just the right amount of water.
It's right, it doesn't mention alcohol anywhere.
There's no distinction.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Specificity.
Specificity. This isn't the title of our paper, this was how the news, and we don't always have control over what the news says about it, although we try to make sure that it's clear. I have to try harder. So there, in addition to the knowledge that we've contributed to the literature, this has been, so we've had over 500 publications on the study. And this has also come from over 100 national and international students and fellows. I don't know what the difference are in resident investigators, but that little circle.
They're not students.
They're not students, but they're still trainees of some sort. So it's been a really important educational.
There were people who came here because they wanted to work with the data.
Okay.
It could be fairly high up in
That's
various
true.
cohort studies around the country or in other kinds of research.
Yeah, so like I said, famous around the world, we have a lot of international people wanting to come and work, that want to come and work with Dr. Barrett Connor and wants to still have access to the data. So the data have also been contributing to many international consortium publications, so big consortia that try to gather data collected all around the world on heart disease will contribute data to that so that we can really expand knowledge. And this is a whole bunch of people who've been involved in the Rancho Bernardo over time. As I was mentioning, it's been included in a lot of consortium around the world. We keep getting asked for more to be contributing to more consortia, so that takes a lot of our time dealing with those kinds of requests. And I've mentioned that it takes a lot of money to do this research, and we're always going around begging for money everywhere. But this has been funded by 5 different institutes, and what was really remarkable is that Dr. Barrett Connor got 4 merit awards, and merit awards are given to really outstanding scientists to let them do their work, and they're funded for like periods of 5 years at a time. So this was really critical for being able to do a lot of this work, and that just is a testament to what an amazing scientist she is. And it was also, like I said, the American Diabetes Association, very critical right there at the beginning. They really helped make sure that this study happened by funding just the analysis of blood glucose. American Heart Association has contributed over the years, and then many other foundations, and they're not all listed here, but a lot of different people who come with specific, or we've gone to them with specific questions that they might be interested in. And so our team has shrunk down over the years. This is our current team. We're actually, what we're doing right now, spending a lot of time doing, particularly Nikki and Ricky, who are our database managers and statisticians, we're taking all that data collected over the past 47 years, cleaning it all up, and putting it in an archive that will be available to other scientists everywhere to use. Because as you can imagine, when we started this study in 1972, everything was on paper, right? There's nothing that was done electronically. So, and questions were asked different ways at different times, so we've had to get that all standardized and put together so that this data set can continue to contribute to knowledge. And I was just recently invited to go talk to the American Gerontological Society in November because they want to know about what data sets exist to study healthy aging in women in particular. And we're a really strong data set for that because, like I said, we have women across the ages a lot that have lived into their 90s, so it's a really good resource for other investigators to study this. So that's what we'll be doing. That's what we're currently focusing on at the moment. And I just wanted to leave you with this last quote from Dr. Vera Connor that was published in the La Jolla Light in 2009 when she was asked to describe her greatest accomplishment. That would have to be the Rancho Bernardo study. That's made my entire career and a lot of other people's careers. The data just keeps coming in. Of course, we owe that success to the Rancho Bernardo participants. They're still answering my letters after 37 years. It's really a remarkable group of dedicated people. And so I'd just like to thank you very much. Anybody in here who's been involved in the study, we're really, really grateful, and very grateful for all of you for coming out here and for giving us this opportunity. And I'm happy to take any questions you have.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to say thank you very much for this. And your colleague family picture early on in the presentation, I appreciated the subtle humor that it was taken between Ben and Jerry's ice cream and an Uncle Bruce.
Recognizing you're right across the driveway from a very nice source, did you draw any conclusions about drinking coffee?
Dr. Fritz Silverstein actually did a study on coffee.
Actually, we found that women, sorry, not men, but women who drank coffee their entire lives at age 80 had better cognitive function than those who just. So women keep drinking their coffee, they're coffee drinkers, and then sorry.
Was men the other way?
No, it's not. No, it did not include decaf. It was caffeinated coffee.
Coffee is also protective against the development of diabetes, and that was shown in the Rancho Bernardo study and many other studies as well. Interestingly. It's not really understood exactly why, but that is the case.
Yeah.
I noticed when you're talking about drinking, you mentioned wine. How would that translate also to the equivalent alcohol in beer or hard liquor?
Yeah. So among the Rancho Bernardo cohort, people were mostly wine drinkers, but not all together. So maybe 60% were drinking wine, 40% were drinking something else, and we didn't find a difference by the type of alcohol. I've also looked at these things in a different cohort study that were not primarily alcohol drinkers. They were beer and spirits drinkers, and found the similar types of associations. So it does seem to be the alcohol and not like the other things that might be in red wine.
Would you say a few words about the archiving grant and how important that is to the data collection here?
Yes, the archiving grant. So we were recently funded by the National Institute on Aging to archive the data and make it available to more investigators because they recognize what a really important resource it is. So we got a 3-year grant that we're nearing the end of. So we have a website, and the data is coded, so you don't know who it's coming from. So we have that data that will be available, and then we have a website that describes the study. Basically, some of the pictures that I showed you there are on the website, and it'll have a list of all of the papers that we could find.
If you Google Rancho Bernardo Study of Healthy Aging, they'll give you the link for it.
Yeah.
It's not really open yet. It's
No.
in development, but you can look at it. You can
Yeah.
see what we're doing, and if you have suggestions, please get in touch with us.
Yeah. So we're currently, what we have up there right now is a description of the study and of the kinds of data available, and we're working really hard to get all that data put together and put up there, which we're going to have.
Well, that means any investigator worldwide, sooner or later, will be able to access these data.
Yes. Any investigator worldwide.
The data will be immortalized.
Yes, that's a great
Always
word.
be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it lives on and on.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Most of us get advice from our doctors.
Uh-huh.
Are any doctors more interested in finding out about your findings and they use them?
Yeah, and a lot of doctors have been involved in using the data for their studies. Do you want to mention anything about that?
Why don't you mention it?
Just that a lot of our
Dr. Barrett
findings-
Connor herself, as you know, is an MD.
Yeah, a lot of our findings have been incorporated into guidelines and so on that physicians use every day.
Louder.
I said a lot of our findings have been incorporated into the guidelines that physicians use every day. So
Right.
our results are being used.
Right. So when the results are published and they're presented at like the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Associations, doctors not even involved in the study are aware of these results, and then they would incorporate them. Knowing, for example, that women with diabetes have higher risk of heart disease, that makes them more careful to assess that in women. So it's been very important.
You're dealing with a population that's higher, has a higher education level, probably takes better care of themselves. It would have been interesting if this would have been paralleled with a group of people from, let's say, Ohio, a small town in Ohio, where the values may be slightly different and the mixture of the people would have been different. And then they would have also taken an area like Selma, Alabama, where the eating habits are totally different and the mix of the people are totally different. And then compare the three areas. It'd be interesting to start that now, where you've got this higher income, better educated group from here, Ohio or somewhere, and also Alabama, and compare the three to see what effect, you know, lifestyle, eating habits, whatever, has to do with what you ended up with.
Yeah,
is there any studies like that going on?
Well, there are other kinds of cohort studies in different places across the country, so that when we publish on our results, we refer to what they found, they refer to what we find, so that when I talked about these reviews that have like 20 studies in them, what we tend to do is we take the studies from different cohorts and then look at whether they've all seen a consistent effect or not. So that's kind of like a meta-analysis or a literature review. So this is, as I was mentioning, this is very important, that what we're finding in Rancho Bernardo by itself doesn't necessarily generalize to the rest of the country, to anybody else that isn't just like this. And so doing those comparisons is critically important to really know what the health impact is of these.
And that's what those collaborative studies that Rancho Bernardo was part of
Those
are about.
consortiums, yeah.
Bringing data from many, many different cohorts, not just around the United States, but from around the world, and comparing the exposure variable, whichever one they're looking at. It might be a biomarker in cardiovascular disease mortality in many different nations with many different socioeconomic status, ethnic diversity, etc.
Was there any correlations, or did anyone look at cancer, or was it just
Yes, we
Or-
have.
We have studied cancer, but we don't have that many cancers in this population. So certainly the Rancho Bernardo study is part of the Oxford collaboration on breast cancer. We looked a lot at benign hyperplasia in men, some studies in prostate cancer, but usually what we're doing is contributing to larger groups with more
Part
data,
of like
more
what
outcomes.
we're getting at is we have to look at beyond our study.
Oh, I'm just going to say I was really impressed because I've been involved since 1972.
Hey, thank you.
Anyhow, when my husband was diagnosed with diabetes, they contacted all the members of his family, regardless of where they lived, and asked them, I guess, worked through the university like of Illinois and some of the other places where his siblings lived, and followed them too for many, many years. So I was really impressed that they would do that.
Yeah.
Because I would get a phone call. What kind of test is this?
Interesting.
It was wonderful.
That's
I'm glad
wonderful
I'm
to
still
hear.
here. But I got to start drinking coffee again. When the doctor.
Yeah, it increases your blood pressure. That's the
I know.
There's these
like
balances
a,
on there.
Yeah.
you know, it's like a.
There's no one
or
thing.
two situation.
Exactly, right. Was I talk about that?
Well, yes. Dr. Barrett Connor just received last year in 2018 the Fred Conrad Coach Lifetime Achievement Award from the Endocrine Society. Dr. O'Connor is not a trained endocrinologist, but she has contributed a huge amount to our understanding of endocrinology. And her walls of her office are covered with awards. She's gotten awards from every organization in the country. Osteoporosis, she's gotten a Legend Award. Cardiovascular disease, cancer, women's health, hormone replacement therapy. The list is very, very long. But this statement is the one that was on her Achievement Award from the Endocrine Society, saying that the hallmarks of Dr. Barrett Connor's enduring success, a driving quest for the truth, rigorous scientific discipline, and a joyful passion, which we can all attest to, have infused every aspect of her career, whether as investigator, lecturer, teacher, or mentor. And this is so true. It's hard to imagine the existence of any other individual whose work reflects such staggering impact. And a lot of that was because of the Rancho Bernardo Study. So you've contributed to a magnificent body of work.
Is the study still going on, or did it end when you retired?
We don't know the word end. So right now we're focusing on archiving, but we probably will continue follow-up, as I said, once we get funding, those sorts of things. But we're definitely interested in still following up as much as we can.
I'm one of the 1972. The most recent letter I got from Dr. Connor was asking about blood pressure and taking a class in Tai Chi.
Oh, yeah.
Did that material, my blood pressure wasn't high enough.
Yeah, you know what? So we were collaborating with a researcher, Dr. Susie Hong, who wanted to do a Tai Chi study looking at its effect on blood pressure. And so Elizabeth was thinking that this, people here might be really interested in participating in that study. So we helped with that, but Dr. Hong was a little disappointed because not a lot of people had high blood pressure. Everybody is too well taken care of. So,
Too healthy to qualify.
Yeah.
I'm a member of the 72 study also.
Thank you, all your 72.
I wonder, a lot of the stuff you have to go over to La Jolla.
Yes.
Instead of doing it here in Huntington. It's my problem.
Yeah, I know, and that distance might not be ideal these days. They did have a clinic here, so some of the things could be done in the clinic here, but the more specialized tests had to be done at the university.
Do they still have the clinic here in the
No.
Colony place?
No, the clinic, I think, has been closed, unfortunately.
It's interesting to think that you name certain things and then you find out if it's a plus or a minus. It would be interesting to find out if any of the participants really stand out. And it would be a combination of things that really make a difference.
Yeah. That's the study I want to do. So that's actually, it's been something that I've been trying to formulate, how to really look at this. What combination of factors together are really the ones that are going to predict who ends up very healthy at age 90.
Tell about the symposium last, the exceptional longevity.
Yeah, we had a whole symposium devoted to trying to answer those types of questions just last week at the university, where we had scientists from different, coming from across the country to talk to us about that. It is a question that scientists right now expect with the aging of the population. We really want answers to these questions. And so looking at like you're mentioning, looking at single factors at a time doesn't really help because things have to balance out. We really need, it's a whole conglomerate of things together. It's a whole pattern of lifestyle, I think, and trying to nail that down scientifically in a really discrete way to answer it scientifically is a bit of a challenge, but yeah. Dave?
Well, wouldn't the missing piece be getting genetic data? You want to know where these things are coming together, right?
Yes.
Genetic data?
Yes. It would be great. So that's all I can say about that, right? We didn't get, well, also think of it, 1972 and 2019, what a difference we are and where we are and what we can do. So the genetic analysis that are done now, the way people are looking at genetics is very different from what was done in the past, where we would look at like a single gene. We know a single gene, except for in rare cases, a single gene really isn't the answer, looking at just does this gene increase or decrease risk of heart disease or increase your risk of dying early, but we need to know all of the genes and how they work together.
Did you mention the blood bank?
The what? The biobank?
The blood bank.
Yeah, we do have, you guys who came here know that we collected things over time, urine and blood. And so we have some of that stored so that we can continue to do analyses. And we recently did one that got a lot of attention with researcher Dr. Paul Mills, looking at levels of glyphosate in the urine, because we could look at, and glyphosate is in Roundup, it's that, yeah. So we can see, and I don't want to alarm anybody because it was a very low level, but it was undetectable when we first started, and now it's detectable. So we, just through what we eat, have been exposed to this, and that was something that's got a lot of attention in the medical news. So we do have samples that can be used, and like, as I'm saying, as new things are developed, as we can develop new assays and tests, we can look at that and look at how that correlated with health in the Rancho Bernardo.
And we are investigating collaborations with other scientists, or they can do it on their own, because all these samples and data will become available, as Dr. Connor said, to the world soon, looking at genetics.
What about the blood types? With the blood type, have any influence on aging blood type?
I don't think we have blood type. We don't have blood type.
It's a very specific test, and it was not tested.
Would you like to say anything, Nancy?
Have they judged stress?
Stress?
We have.
Stress, and they go over stress, because that can really fade.
Yeah, do you want to say anything about stress?
We actually did collect information on stress. We also collected information on coping skills. One of the things that we have that I worked on with a student, it's not out there yet, but we did work on it, is looking at stress and cognitive function, but in the context of coping. And the people who had higher stress levels and didn't have enough coping skills or coping ability to deal with it had poorer cognitive function, but it really didn't seem to make much of a difference if they had enough coping to deal with the stress, that it really did affect the cognitive function.
Right, so stress is different things to different people, and so some people can tolerate more than some people, than other people. And if you're able to rebound and handle it better, it doesn't matter if your stress peaks high, as long as it comes down quickly.
Once you can handle it, right?
Yeah, once you can get over it, right? So it's like, don't sweat it, right?
And how did you quantify optimism? Because you talked about
So
that.
optimism, there is a scale called the LOT-R, which is a life orientation test, which has been used endlessly in psychological literature. So that is the scale that we use, and you get a submeasure of optimism, a submeasure of pessimism, and total LOT-R score, which is the balance of optimism and pessimism.
And interesting in that study, which Dr. Fritz Silverstein led, pessimism was not associated with cardiovascular mortality, just the optimism score of the scale.
Being the protective association.
Right, protective.
Hi. Yeah, I have a comment about cholesterol, okay? And most people look at their total cholesterol score, and that's all they look at, okay? But you have to go beyond that, and I'm sure you didn't test for this in 1972. But I have a heart disease in my family. So I went to a cardiologist, and they go beyond that, because I had a pretty good total score of like 130 or 150. I went to a cardiologist, they test for LDL small particles. And that was my problem, because it's supposed to be 1,000 or under. Mine was 1,700. So thanks to Crestor and my great cardiologist in La Jolla, I got it down to 1,100, but it took a few years. So I think that's something that you have to tell people, you know.
Right, yeah. And they actually did look at this in this study,
They did that in 1972?
And they didn't do it in 1972.
Nobody was doing it in 1972.
Yeah, I figured.
But they have published on the different,
particle sizes.
different particles.
Yeah, so I'm glad you're aware of that, because not that many people are. You know, people just don't go to cardiologists, and they really should.
Right.
Because I think the cardiologist is the only doctor who will test for that.
Yeah, I don't get that's part of my standard test, that particular density. We get HDL and LDL now as a standard thing to get both of those, but not the more specific.
They test for HDL, large particles, small particles, LDL, small particles, and large particles. But I think the dangerous part is the LDL, small particles. So I'm glad I went and I got tested and I did something about it.
Yeah, did you all look at humor at all?
We should have given everybody a humor test.
We have the data. Do you have a collaborator you'd like to work with?
Really, it's going to be right out there. You can get to it too.
Well, thank you all very much.